Islam meant everything to me. Leaving Islam meant I didn't know what to do with my life anymore. Hello, I'm Ali Malik, and I volunteer for CEMB, and also, I'm also an online activist for ex-Muslims' rights, and I campaign for ex-Muslims to get asylum here in the European countries and in the West in general. I was born and raised in Pakistan, belonged to a Salafi sect of Islam, and grew up learning about all the Salafi interpretation of Islam, and I believed in Salafi. I was really actually quite adamant on my Salafi beliefs, and I followed them to the core. And to understand why my family was so fundamentalist in their beliefs in Salafi Islam, because just after the partition, my family moved from India to Pakistan. So they migrated. Both of my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, were 7 and 8, and their families knew each other. They both moved to southern Punjab part of Pakistan, where they got their Islamic education. They were quite practicing, but not fundamentalist in the first 25 years after the partition. When they were living there, a family next door, they had new neighbors. They were Ahmadis. So new Ahmadi neighbors moved in with them. And then the elder brother of my grandfather thought, oh, it's a golden opportunity for us to convert some murtads back to Islam, because this family had left Islam, mainstream Islam, and went to Ahmadi Islam, started believing in Ahmadi Islam. My grandparents, who were already married by the time it was 60s, they started proselytize Islam to their neighbors, new neighbors. But in return, the new neighbors asked them to read some of their literature. So it actually worked the other way around. So my extended family of my grandparents started turning into Ahmadis. My grandfather's elder brother, who was actually an imam in a Salafi mosque in South Punjab, converted, and then he became a murabbi, that's the scholar of Ahmadi Islam. Then one after the other, all of them started moving into Ahmadi Islam. And my grandfather, with his wife and his kids, decided to move away because he thought, I may become Ahmadi as well. So he moved about 24 hours train ride away from all of his family to a northern Punjab, northern part of the Punjab, where he went to a mosque and recited the Shahada again, because he thought maybe subconsciously has admitted for Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani to be the Messiah or to be the prophet and reformer. From that day onwards, he became really fundamentalist because he started valuing his faith a lot more. My mum got married in 87. And then just after they had me in 91, my dad moved to Saudi Arabia to have a business. That meant then my mum with her kids at the time, she moved back to my grandparents' house. So I grew up with my grandparents, who were already really fundamentalist, because they were really scared that they had lost all of their family. All of their family had become murtads. They had no connection with them at the time. So they started instilling the really fundamentalist interpretation of Salafi Islam into us. So I grew up believing in Wahhabism and in Tawheed, and how Islam is so perfect. There is no question into it. And I was extremely practicing as well in that. So if I go through a timeline of my childhood, like a day's timeline, we woke up before Fajr, the morning prayer, went for the morning prayer. After morning prayer, we stayed in the mosque for madrasa, studied Quran for 2 hours, came back home, had breakfast, went to school. Schools in Pakistan start with tilawah, the recitation of Quran. then praising Muhammad, and then praying a collective prayer, um, and then national anthem, and went to the class started. So in all of my syllabus throughout, like primary, secondary, high, and even college, we had two Islamic subjects in college, three Islamic subjects in high school, one called Islamic Studies, which 1 hour a day. Arabic Studies, they say it's Arabic Studies, but it's mainly translating Quran into Urdu, the Quranic text, and then Hadith Studies, where you get you're allotted certain hadiths, and then you have to translate that into that, and then after school is done, you do your Zohar prayer in school. After the Asr prayer, a bit of playing time, and then Maghrib, and then after Maghrib there's usually a majlis in our mosque where people just sit around and talk about Islam. And then Isha prayer. I prayed 5 times, even more at times. I prayed Chasht, which is midday prayer, just before the Zawal. I prayed Awabin, which is just after after Maghrib prayer. So there were times I was praying 7 or 8 prayers a day, 5 first prayers and 2 or 3 nafli prayers, which aren't mandatory, but I was doing it because I wanted to be a Muslim. I wanted to be a good practicing Muslim. And other than that, like every day we spent at least 4 to 5 hours just learning Islam throughout the childhood. And by the time I was grown up, I was so much into it that I did I'tikaf every year. So I'tikaf, who don't know, it's last 10th day of Ramadan, you just stay in a mosque to worship. I did I'tikaf for 5 years in a row before my 18th birthday. From the age of 14 to 18th, I did I'tikaf every year. I started going out for preaching. I went to at least 15 tours of preaching, which was mainly for myself, because I wanted to learn more. Because if you're living in a mosque, all those 15 trips I did with Tablighi Jamaat, even though I didn't believe in Tablighi Jamaat, I thought they weren't fundamentalist enough. I thought they were talking about their old people more than they were talking about Muhammad and Allah. I thought they put their belief in Za'if hadiths that aren't Sahih, not authentic hadiths. Even though I disagreed with them a great deal, I was still going because I wanted to learn. I could spend the time I'm in a mosque to learn about Islam. I memorized the last chapter of Quran. I memorized about 30 surahs. So I was extremely practicing. Because I was so much into Islam, I constantly had to navigate my way through my goal of essentially not having any question about Islam. So more I was trying to not having any questions, not questioning Islam. There were more thoughts coming into my mind. Oh, what about this? Because I was so much into it. I had lost all faith in practices. So the certain type of practices I didn't believe. I thought whatever you practice is essentially all going to Allah. It doesn't matter if you do Rafa Yadan or Amil bil Jaha, or how many times you raise your finger during Shahada. It really doesn't matter, as long as you know in your heart that it's going to Allah and you're following the Sunnah of the Prophet. So the first instance I can remember, and ironically, it was in Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina. So we went for Hajj. I was 17. We went for Hajj, all of my family. Because I was there with my mother, with my father, and my grandparents. At 17, I didn't want to spend as much time with them, because you do want to be alone at that age. I started hanging out in the library of Masjid Nabawi, which is just, I think, closer to Babi Umar. Started reading about Muhammad because I loved Muhammad too, like more than a normal Muslim does these days. Started reading about him, his biographies, and I came across issues that didn't resonate. Even though I had studied Islam, Islam was taught to me 4 to 5 hours a day all my life before that, from the age of 7 to 17, in 10 years. Nobody in any education, either madrasa, school, informal, formal, any education had told me that Muhammad had had sex with women without marriage, that Muhammad had owned women as his properties, women who were gifted to him from different kings and governors around the world. He kept them as his slaves. That was one of the first questions, slavery. Then there was the Aisha's Ummah, funnily enough, never like bothered me when I was a Muslim. I was constantly looking to justify Aisha's Ummah, or people. So Aisha's Ummah wasn't, when I was believing, now I think it's abhorrent if she was a child. But Muhammad's sexual slaves, it was a big thing, because we had always been told nikah is what gives you a halal certificate for having sex, or all humans are equal. Like the famous last sermon that no Arab has superiority over non-Arabs, or Muslim, non-Muslim, whatever it was. Then you come across the thing where Muhammad had actually owned other human beings for his pleasure, for his sexual gratitude. He even had a son from one of his laundries, his concubines, sexual slaves. That was a massive thing for me. And then him ordering killings. I thought Muhammad was a peaceful man. All my childhood, we were told he was a peaceful man, but little did I know, like, all the independent research into Muhammad was telling me something completely different from what I had been taught throughout my education years. So that was one of the first instances I remember. And then from there onwards, the questions just kept on piling up. So because that's the thing with zeal. I was a zealot. The foundation is so intense and strong, it just needs one crack. And then once there's a crack in the dam, then water just starts pouring out. Then all of the question, Aisha's age came in, then his convenience, the Quran just coming down on his convenience. For example, Muhammad's taking a fifth wife, and he's telling a majma, his congregation, let's say, I'm taking a fifth wife. And all the Arabs around his companions goes, oh, we're only allowed 4. Why are you taking 5? Moment of convenience, Jibreel comes right that minute and tells him, okay, and he goes, okay, Jibreel just came and told me, because I'm your prophet, I'm allowed more than 4. So that law doesn't apply to me. So even in the mindset where I was justifying 4 marriages, polygamy for men only, that said that he had, that is typical cultish leader behavior. That's what a cult leader does. You can have different set of rules for yourself, but your followers can't do that for your own gratification. That thing came up. Then a whole issue of women's rights just came. Everything just started coming at me at once. And then I thought, okay, I'm gonna get this much from my father in Sharia. So I'm 2 parts. My sister is 1 part. Why? She might be a better human than I am. She might be a better daughter, a better kid to my father than I am. Why is she getting half? Why is my sister's testimony half the worth of mine? As far as I know, she's more intelligent than I am. Her memory is better than I am. Just because she's a woman? So all of these questions just started coming in, and then I knew Muhammad wasn't perfect. And for me, for a fundamentalist like me, if Muhammad wasn't perfect, Islam wasn't perfect. But after the Hajj, we went back to Pakistan. All of these questions are constantly raining on my mind. My behavior overall towards life has changed a bit. Where if some of my friends, which I knew were gay in Pakistan, they were in hiding, completely in hiding, I no longer had any problems with them, because for me, Muhammad wasn't perfect, and why should any of his teachings be? If he didn't believe in homosexuality, why should my friend who actually is gay, he was quite feminine and camp as well, why should we condemn him saying he's an Islamic? So my behavior throughout in Pakistan started changing, and that started showing. I was being kind of really annoying with my questions as well at the time. So I did pose the question about Muhammad's sexual slaves in my mosque, which led to an uproar in my mosque. So my father's elder cousin was a trustee of the mosque. He was also the chairman of the mosque. I asked the question, got shut down really aggressively, sent home from the mosque. Then my father got called into the mosque, and they told my father, your son is asking wrong type of questions. And my father was really angry at me, started shouting at me, okay, why are you asking these questions and this and that? So I started just going to a different mosque with my questions. I was doing all that. But then after my 18th birthday, I came to UK, came to London for my studies in there, and then experienced a whole new world outside Islam. Because before that point, I was in Pakistan, in Saudi. They're both Muslim countries. There was only one way of life, Islam. You have to be Muslim. Even though you're questioning, you can't really verbalize it, because in my colleges, I used to see, so there was a couple of instances where somebody had desecrated Quran and thrown it in a market, and the college got shut down, and all the students from college would go out and do riots because they wanted this person who's committed this blasphemy, it's the beer, to be arrested and put to death. So I had seen all that happening. I knew what would happen to me if I fall on the wrong side of this crowd and this mob mentality. Didn't really verbalize my real questions about Muhammad's perfection in Pakistan. But after coming to London, the exposure I got from different types of lifestyles and cultures and religions even, that was eye-opening. I thought, okay, Islam isn't the only way. Western society isn't what we're told in Pakistan. They're not immoral. The morality I found the Western morality to be, in practice, to be the better than Pakistani one. Because in Pakistan, in theory, they say the best things you can imagine. But in practice, it's completely different. There's a lot of ghiba. Ghiba is one of the kabira gunas. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of leg pulling. Nobody's happy if somebody else progress in their life. So jealousy, envy, and everything. I had seen that all my life. But coming here, people are actually happy. They don't care what you believe in. They really don't care about your religion, your personal ideology, and they're still being really good human beings. So that exposure was quite a lot. Even though I was still culturally Muslim, I wasn't doing anything that Islam forbade, because that's been my lifestyle throughout. Never smoked, never drank, didn't have sex in all of my life in Pakistan. I was still practicing that cultural, or rather the aspects of my culture that Islam had instilled. I was still doing all that, but then all of that one day just led me to actually just say, okay, this is all, and just stop believing in it. My brother was living here with me. My brother started seeing a change in me, in my philosophy of life. Whereas whenever he'd ask me, he's still really practicing. He still lives in London. Whenever he'd ask me to pray, I'd just say, oh, it doesn't matter. You don't really need to. So this was showing, and eventually my brother one day decided to actually move out. So that happened, and the friendship started deteriorating because my relationship with myself was quite full of animosity, because I was quite angry at myself for leaving Islam. So Islam meant everything to me. Leaving Islam meant I didn't know what to do with my life anymore. So my relationship with myself was affected the most, because there was still some part within me, even though I believed it all to be bullshit. I believed like Muhammad had never been perfect. The Quran's infallibility, which we haven't discussed, but there was when I looked into Quran, the so-called scientific miracles, they didn't make any sense either. Uh, so my relationship with myself got the effects on myself was the worst. Whereas some part from within me, because it was my identity, it was the thing I belonged to the most. That part of me was cursing the other part of me who was questioning, who had left Islam. So there was a constant struggle of identity, of myself. Okay, what am I doing? Am I being traitor to myself and my society and my parents for leaving Islam? So identity and existential crisis that pushed me into deep depression and isolation. Didn't hang out with anybody, didn't make new friends, didn't went out and talk about these issues. This was all happening in 2012, and I came out, met first my first ex-Muslim in 2016. For 4 years, I didn't know there was a community out there. I didn't know some other people have gone through the same stuff, or people actually leave Islam, because I thought I was cursed. I was constantly cursing myself for actually, but so for a year and a half, it was really bad. Where I was suicidal for a while, uh, self-harming, did all that. But then just TV became my life. I just started watching TV. And because I couldn't speak any English back then either, not much of it, started learning language through TV as well. Started watching a lot of comedy because I wasn't happy in my life. I was just looking for laughs. And comedy became the thing I watched day and night. And then some of the comedians were atheists, and they were joking about religion like it was no problem at all. And I was thinking, Stephen Fry talking about religion, Alan Davis, QI was one of my favorite shows. I was watching QI religiously. Them joking about religion and making jokes on God and everything. Because even though I'd left Islam, I had never questioned God by that time. I thought there was still God out there. And then these people, or Jimmy Carr making jokes about Christianity as it is calling Maryam, who was like really sacred for Muslims as well, calling her slag. And there's 12,000 people there sitting and laughing. Oh, okay, what's happening here? What's this? Started exploring that a bit more. And then from comedians, because I was looking for this material, because it was actually making me, giving me a bit of comfort, because I thought, okay, religions aren't sacred. You can joke about them. It's normal to question religion. Started seeking into the avenue. Okay, who are people who actually talk about religion and scholars who talk about religion? Came across Hitchens one day, and Hitchens, I was offended. I was like, wow, how can this guy say this, so much of this stuff, which actually makes sense, and nobody's going up and stabbing him to death? And from Hitchens to Dawkins and Harris, and still didn't come across any ex-Muslim. I don't think there was any ex-Muslim prominent that time on YouTube. I just didn't come across any. So atheism, I consumed a lot of atheistic literature and content online, which was actually making more and more and more sense by the day. Came to realization that, okay, we don't really need God. He started reading history, quite a lot of it, human history throughout, and the inception of God and the notion of God, and how from polytheism to monotheism, and to understand the whole psyche of how religion works, or how religion actually started. The transition from comedy to serious content, and then history combined with it. So the notion of organized religion and using God as a way of ruling people actually made me believe, okay, this is all man-made, and I stopped believing in God either. Well, I knew that God didn't exist by the time then. So after that period of isolation, it has changed me a lot, and for the better, because the empathy. So the no longer otherization of other people, like just saying because you're different in the way you believe in God, or because your God is different from Allah, you're hellbound. Or believing in the Quranic verse of Yahud and Nasar can't be your friend, Christian and Jews can't be your friend. And polytheism were idol worshippers. They were already non-human to Muslims. Letting go of that notion, it helped me to create better social ties, better friends, because the intrusiveness and judgment that comes with being a Muslim, that wasn't there anymore. So respecting people, actually, no matter what they believe in, that was a massive thing that came from living Islam. When I was questioning Muhammad, I didn't actually decide that Muhammad wasn't the messenger of God. All I decided was Muhammad wasn't perfect. He's not an example for us. And then further research, actually, when I was actually looking into atheistic materials and content, then the question of morality, which is a massive question, the static morality of Islam, which is set in the 7th century, can that be applied today? So with me, the letting Muhammad go from my life wasn't because I thought he wasn't the messenger of God. It was just because his teachings didn't make sense to me. And I didn't actually look into if Muhammad was a messenger or not. And because the behavior was cultish, all I thought was maybe he had his followings. Well, he definitely had his following, but he was actually a fraudster. So, like, tell a lie long enough and it becomes your truth. A child is born in a Muslim family. What's the first thing that goes in his ear? Azan and Shahada. Fajr Azan and Shahada, something like that. And then parents take pride in if the children's first word is Bismillah and not mother or father. The first thing they teach them to say Bismillah. Then the first thing they teach them Fatiha. So Quran is very systematically instilled into children. Children are indoctrinated into it. And the language problem, because we know most of the Muslims today aren't Arabs, or even if they are Arab, Quranic Arabic is completely different from what they speak in their countries, and so lack of understanding of it. And it's actually discouraged because I was told phrases like, oh, it's so philosophical, it won't make sense to you unless you ask somebody to explain it to you. So that notion of it being so complicated that a normal human mind can't understand it, that you always have to consult a scholar or read a tafsir, which was written 200 years after Muhammad's death. Nobody bothered before that. Ibn Tafsir was 200 years after Muhammad's death. So it's very systematic. It's strange because you taking away the curiosity of a children's mind, because and as Neil deGrasse Tyson says, children are the best scientists we have because they ask the question of why. And most Muslim children sooner or later would ask the question of why, but they are shut down on that. They are told, oh, you can't question. The Quran itself says it's infallible. You have to believe that. Oh, why do you have to believe that? Because Allah says so. Why does Allah say so? Because it's in Quran. That circular fallacy of just telling kids constantly, bombarding them with the notion that it's truth. And then the language problem, because I certainly didn't understand any Arabic when I believed in Quran. I had to always consult to, first of all, Ibn Tafsir, what is called? Ibn Khatir, and then subcontinental scholars, or Ashraf Ali Thanvi, or somebody who had Salafist interpretation of Islam. And then that claim that Quran's not going to be changed, that it's in the same shape and form like it was when it was descended, supposedly, which it isn't. The first written down copy of Quran in this chronological order is by Usman. So in Muhammad's lifetime, nobody bothered in actually putting the Quran in writing form. They'd write it on leaves or some things, but it wasn't in an order. And this order doesn't make any sense anyways, but nobody's told to question that. That discouragement that comes from parents, teachers, schools, madrasas, everybody's constantly discouraging kids to question Quran. So Islam calls itself, Islam says if you leave Islam, you're committing treason. And then that mentality goes into communities and cultures, whichever culture's been conquered by Islam, essentially, because Islam eats up the cultures and it just gives you an Islamic culture. And then multiculturalism as a social policy in Britain, especially. So in Muslim countries, we understand, okay, we know these people believe in this. And if you leave this, because they still live in really authoritarian states, and the set of boundary is really defined for them. You can't fall outside of that boundary. If you do, you're prosecuted, you're killed. There's threat of violence against you. But where Britain and the Western society and enlightened society, let's say, has failed is using multiculturalism as a social policy, allowing people to bring in their culture and essentially allowing them to have a ghettoized version of their countries within this country, allowing Sharia courts to exist in Britain. That's not secular. It's far from it. Why are Sharia courts operating in Britain for civil matters? Divorcing is easy for men because you can say 3 times, but women has to go through Sharia court, which take a year, and they're constantly. That's not secularism. That's not even liberal. Liberal thought was founded upon blasphemy. Why are you protecting Islam against blasphemy in the West? Aren't you actually turning your back on the very liberal thought you take pride in? Voltaire was a blasphemer. Voltaire used to. Some of Voltaire's literature is so against God that even today's atheists would find it extreme. But he's one of the founding fathers of liberal thought. And if these countries take pride in being liberal democracies, but somehow allow some other diaspora communities to bring in their draconian laws with them, I don't want to misrepresent. Sharia courts are civil. They can't prosecute you, but the mentality is still there. The mentality of communities thinking is treason if you leave Islam, will disown you, is still there. That's because you've allowed them to essentially be a different culture within a country. Why aren't human rights applied universally throughout the Western world? They're not. Muslims are using completely different set of rules for themselves. And they're demanding, like, Islamophobia is essentially, like, now we see in Britain political parties accepting the definition of Islamophobia. That's protecting Islam against blasphemy. Why is blasphemy against Christianity is okay, but against Islam, it's a problem? Why does Islam get a special status in Western countries? It shouldn't. So Western countries has failed when they implemented multiculturalism as a social policy, which it shouldn't have been. So notion of God, it's actually, I looked into God historically, how the notion of God actually came up in human mind. if we start from right in the beginning, from hunters and gatherers, when they started settling down with the agricultural revolution, because if you could farm plants, that means you don't have to wander around. Let's settle around a fertile land. So then they started living in societies, in settlements. Uh, Now the question is how to sustain that settlement and that society. The bigger it grows, the complicated it gets. So that's where one of the first thing was by gossip, having intimate knowledge of each other. But you can only sustain a small community on that. By the time the first big city was, let's say, in those times, Jericho, you can no longer sustain the city of Jericho on gossip. Now you need something bigger, because in gossip you can sustain a society of, let's say, 150 people, because you can know intimate secrets of each other that binds you together. If the society grows a bit bigger than that, let's say 1,000 people, you can't really sustain a society of a settlement of 1,000 people solely on the basis of gossip or knowing each other intimately. That's where myths come along. So if those 1,000 people, or let's say 950 out of those 1,000 people, believed in a common myth, that was something combining them. So that society is now sustainable. Societies are growing even bigger now. 10,000 people. You need more shared myths now. And then neighboring cultures. Now, there's one city of 10,000 here, one city of 10,000 here. How do they trade with each other? Now, to have a better, because if you're growing wheat here, rice here, you kind of need both. Now, to trade with one another, you need to share each other's myths. The more connections we grew, the more myths we created. And now polytheism came along, because the survival is dependent on one area having a better crop. If this area doesn't have a better crop, now we can actually trade. Polytheism comes very big in that sense, where you're actually believing in everybody's just to have a better connection with them, because everybody believes in the same thing. What happens when the cities get bigger and bigger? Let's say Egyptian Empire. It's got so big now, you can't really remember all of the myths of different societies to have a relationship with them. That's where the notion of king comes along. One king ruling all. So you still have something in common that you all look up to. And then from the notion of, then kings got so much power that they started believing in themselves to be supreme powers. The notion of supreme powers always existed before that, like, and in animism, we're half humans and half that, but they were only looked upon when there was something you can't control. The weather, okay, we need better weather, let's pray to this, let's pray to that. But it was more for societal purposes. And then from kings, the notion of God stems, because if somebody has so much power that is supreme, and the king of Egypt, the first monotheistic notion it came from Egypt. Akhenaten, he was the first person to say there's only one God. Because if I can control these million people, why can't there be a God that can control all of this? Which failed after this, because people just wanted to believe in that. So this whole notion of God, to me, just sounded, through looking at human history, it just seemed to me that it was created just to control or to establish better communities. And then when the communities got bigger, to control those communities. And then having a God didn't just make any sense at all if you didn't have a religion. Ex-Muslims do need to speak out, first of all, because there's still stigma around leaving Islam. People don't feel, because there's so much fear when you are going through those questioning stages, that you are going to get disowned, or if you live in a Muslim society, that there's going to be violence against you. First of all, it's important to let them know that we are here for you. We are here. uh, Blasphemy is important because we need to be accepted for who we are, and there doesn't seem to be any other way to get the dialogue going with Muslim community. So I don't necessarily, I don't believe in converting Muslims or asking Muslims to leave at all. I don't care what you believe in. My point is, ex-Muslims need to speak out, because we need to get a dialogue going where Muslim societies overall accept people for leaving Islam, and the stigma around leaving Islam, the capital punishments around the world for leaving Islam need to go, because we see our kin suffering around the world. We see in Pakistan, where I'm from, there's 40 people on death row right now for criticizing Islam. So it's important. It's important to show solidarity with people who are suffering, who are being discriminated against, who are being hunted down, who have the real fear of their life. It's important. If we are speak out and be safe somehow in a society which allows us our right and freedom of expression, we need to come out and speak. I think it's actually stages. So when you leave Islam and you've admitted to yourself you've left Islam, there's a lot of anger in you, because you feel like you've been lied to all of your life. You've been oppressed, where you can't do most of the natural things that human body or human anatomy desires, because they are sin. So that sense of oppression that comes after being liberated from it, you feel like you've been lied to and been oppressed all your life. So it's quite natural to have anger and animosity towards your oppressors. And that sometimes comes out aggressively, which I'm completely fine with. And then people go through stages. Then after a while, people say, okay, there's no point in being angry now. Let's all calm down, and let's all just campaign for having a society where we can all work with each other. And it doesn't work for everybody, because if your mother tells you that you're not my son anymore because you're not Muslim, of course you're going to be angry. She's biologically programmed to love you, but because you choose to leave her ideology, she's ready to disown you, you are going to be angry. And it's perfectly healthy to let the anger out. It's fine if it affects our relations with some Muslim organizations, I don't care, as long as ex-Muslims feel they are progressing into something that we can sustain as a society. More than happy with angered or aggressive approaches. But that's not something I would do. I do get angry at times based on my situation with my family, because it's human to have anger. That's not something I do. I'd rather have a reasoned conversation with people than be angry and aggressive, because it shuts conversation down sometimes. So no, spiritual. No, not really. I'm actually like hard bound on facts now. I don't really look for spirituality. I've dabbled in it. Doesn't make any sense to me personally. And I think when you're conscious of the fact your brain is the driver. For example, like I was talking to somebody last night, and she was telling me that she had psychedelics and she saw something. And it's perfectly fine to see something, see geometric patterns in the clouds, or letters coming out of the pavement. Completely fine. Or when people are spiritual, and they think they're connecting to a higher power. I'm just too conscious of the fact that your brain is the driver behind everything. And whatever it is, it's your brain playing games on you, or it's your brain telling you something to make you feel better. So for me, I'm hardwired on facts and learning from history, and actually learning human psyche of how we've evolved throughout history. I'm quite hard on that. I think if you're doubting Islam, the hard part is already done. because the hard part in Islam is doubting it, because it's so dogmatic and your foundation is so strong into believing. As Hitchens once said, actually, the problem with Islam is the degree of absolution. If you've started questioning is absolution, if you've started questioning that it may not be absolute, you've done the hard part. Don't get scared of anything after that, and don't let your curiosity down. Don't stop the learning process. Keep the curiosity alive, because it's gonna do wonders for you.